The mass relay had been dying when it took her. Shepard remembered the Reaper's beam cutting through the Normandy's hull, remembered Anderson's voice crackling over the comm, remembered the choice, always the choice. And then the relay detonated beneath her feet, and the universe folded in half like a burning page. No darkness, no silence, just light so violent it had a sound. And then gravity reasserted itself with brutal indifference, and she was falling through a sky the color of a bruised eye, and below her an entire world was on fire. She hit the rockcrete at a roll, combat instincts converting momentum into motion before conscious thought caught up. Her omni-tool flared orange, scanning, and immediately threw cascading error codes. Atmospheric composition nominal, but something in the local electromagnetic spectrum was screaming interference on every frequency she trusted. The tool sputtered, recalibrated, gave up on half its functions entirely, and settled into basic combat mode like a soldier falling back to their sidearm when the rifle jams. All right, new rules. The city around her was enormous and dying. Towers like cathedral spines clawed at the smoke-choked sky, their surfaces carved with iconography she couldn't read but could feel, the weight of 1 billion prayers compressed into stone. Artillery rang from somewhere distant, rhythmic as a funeral drum. The air tasted of promethium and rust and ozone, and something older, something that made the eezo nodes along her spine tingle with faint, irrational unease. Not Reaper energy, something else, something sideways from reality, watching through the cracks. Civilians ran in organized terror, not panicking, she noted, but drilled. They moved in columns, following painted arrows on the walls, wearing identical gray expressions of people who had survived apocalypse before and had built evacuation routes into their muscle memory. Whatever this place was, war wasn't a disruption here. War was the weather. She pulled her mattock from her back, checked the thermal clip, 6 shots remaining, and crouched behind a collapsed pillar as a column of soldiers in battered green armor double-timed past her position. They carried weapons she didn't recognize, long-barreled rifles that hummed with capacitor charge, bayonets fixed and gleaming. Their boots hit the ground in perfect unison. On their shoulders, a symbol, a skull crowned with laurels, stamped over a double-headed eagle. One of them spotted her. The laser gun came up, eyes above the sight, young, exhausted, terrified in the specific way of someone trained to never show terror. Shepard raised one hand slowly, keeping the mattock angled down. Universal gesture, older than language. "I'm not your enemy," the soldier shouted something in a dialect her translator couldn't parse. More rifles swung toward her. A sergeant pushed through, took one look at her N7 armor, black and red and nothing like anything worn by friend or foe in this theater, and made a decision. He didn't shoot her. That, Shepard would later reflect, was the moment everything began. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions and impossible heroes, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the dark millennium. They zip-tied her wrists with something that wasn't plastic, a fiber she didn't recognize, stronger than it looked, and marched her 3 kilometers through a city actively consuming itself. Shepard didn't resist. She cataloged. The soldiers around her moved with the mechanical precision of people who had drilled beyond thought, beyond fear, into something that functioned like courage but was architecturally different, built from obedience rather than choice. She'd commanded soldiers like that. She'd also buried them. The distinction mattered, and she filed it away. The city's name, she gathered from the shouted communications crackling through their helmet vox units, was Varanthos Prime, a hive world. She'd intuited that from the scale of the architecture, the layered density of the population, the way the towers grew from each other like coral rather than standing independent. Hundreds of millions of people stacked into vertical sprawl, and somewhere in the mid-hive, something with significant firepower was trying to reduce those hundreds of millions to ash. She heard the enemy before she saw them. A sound like wet machinery, like organs configured for violence, biological and industrial at once. Through a gap in a collapsed wall, she glimpsed them briefly. Hunched figures in rusted armor, faces hidden behind ragged hoods, moving with the erratic fervor of people who had surrendered their decision-making to something external. Chaos. She didn't have the vocabulary yet, but she recognized the silhouette of fanaticism. They reached a command post buried in a manufactorum basement. Lumen globes cast everything in amber. Tactical maps covered 3 walls. Physical maps, she noted, hand-drawn and updated with grease pencil, no digital overlay, no real-time satellite feed. Whoever commanded this war was doing it with 19th century tools dressed in Gothic aesthetic. The commander was a woman. Mid-50s, one eye replaced with a brass augmetic that whirred softly when it focused, voice like gravel in a tin drum. Colonel Avra Cestus, 114th Varanthos Rifles. She walked a slow circle around Shepard, the way professionals examine something they don't understand, but aren't afraid of. "You fought through Hercasian Square," Cestus said, not a question. 3 heretic contacts, single-handedly, with a weapon none of my armorers can identify, and... She paused, consulting a data slate. What Corporal Marin describes as blue fire from your bare hands." "Biotics," Shepard said. "Mass effect field manipulation. I can explain the physics if you want, but it'll take a while, and it sounds like you're busy." Cestus stared at her. Shepard held the stare. She'd held stares from specters, from elusive men, from reapers the size of small moons. A colonel with a brass eye was manageable. "You're not from here," Cestus said finally. "No." "Where?" Shepard considered how to answer that honestly. "Somewhere that doesn't exist in your charts. I came through something that broke when I crossed it, and I can't go back the same way." She let that land, then added, "But I'm a soldier, and you're fighting a war. Point me at the enemy." Cestus looked at her for a long moment. The brass eye whirred. "You put her in holding," she told her sergeant, "but feed her first." Holding turned out to be a supply closet with a cot and a bowl of something that smelled like reconstituted protein and tasted like a political compromise. Shepard ate every bite. She'd been in worse cells. The Cerberus detention block on Horizon. The Alliance brig after the Bahak incident. At least here nobody had confiscated her armor, which told her either Cestus was confident in the fiber restraints or she respected Shepard enough to leave her dignity intact. Either way, Shepard appreciated the gesture and spent 40 minutes working the binding against a shelf bracket until it frayed enough to slip. She didn't leave. She just wanted the option. The Inquisitor arrived 6 hours later. She heard him before the door opened, Not his footsteps, which were precise and nearly silent, but the change in atmosphere his presence created. The guards outside snapped to a different kind of attention, the specific rigidity of people afraid of something that outranks them in ways that have nothing to do with military hierarchy. The door opened, and Inquisitor Valdris of the Ordo Hereticus filled the frame like a warning written in human form. He was tall, spare, dressed in a long coat that had absorbed a decade of other people's misfortunes. His face was the face of a man who had made 10,000 hard decisions and regretted perhaps 3 of them. He carried no visible weapon, which Shepard recognized immediately as the most threatening thing about him. He sat across from her without invitation, placed a data slate on the cot between them, and looked at her the way she imagined a scalpel looks at a problem. "Commander Shepard," he said. Her name, somehow. And 7 designation. Commanding officer of a vessel called the Normandy. He glanced at the slate. None of these designations exist in any Imperial record. No sector of origin, no gene seed registry, no Mechanicus identification stamp. He folded his hands. You are, administratively speaking, impossible. I get that a lot. I've executed people for less suspicious origins. I know, Shepard said. You're not going to execute me. The faintest shift in his expression. Not surprise. He'd curated surprise out of his repertoire long ago. But something adjacent, recalibration. Your confidence is either remarkable or delusional, he said. It's informed, she replied. You came alone. You left me my armor. You said my name first, which means you've been researching me since Cestus filed her report, which means you're curious. And curious people don't execute before they understand. She leaned forward slightly. You want to know what I am? Valdris studied her for a long moment. Outside, artillery rolled across the mid-hive like slow thunder. I probed your mind, he said quietly. Preliminary psychic survey. Standard procedure for unidentified contacts. He paused. I found no chaos taint, no demonic resonance, no warp signature of any recognizable school. Another pause, heavier than the first. What I found instead was something I have not encountered in 31 years of inquisitorial service. Shepard waited. Hope, he said. Structural, load-bearing, irrational in its scope. He picked up the data slate. It terrifies me more than any demon I have ever burned. They released her on Valdris's authority, which apparently carried enough institutional weight to silence even Colonel Cestus's considerable skepticism. Shepard spent the next 72 hours earning her keep. The siege of Varanthos Prime was 3 weeks old and losing ground by the day. The heretic forces, chaos cultists, Valdris explained with the clipped efficiency of a man describing a weather pattern, had seized the mid-hive generatorum, cutting power to 40% of the city's defense networks. Without the generatorum, the void shields would fail within days. Without the void shields, the orbital battery the Chaos Warband had positioned above the planet would crack the hive open like an egg. Shepard looked at the tactical maps, asked 6 questions that made Cestus's staff officers exchange uncomfortable glances. Egan proposed a 3-pronged infiltration route that bypassed the cultists' main defensive line entirely by moving through the hive's sub-level waste channels. That's the sewers, one staff officer said flatly. Yes, Shepard agreed. They took the sewers. The operation took 11 hours and cost fewer lives than any comparable action in the preceding 3 weeks. Shepard moved at the front of the infiltration team, biotics flaring blue in the darkness, Matic tracking targets with the practiced economy of someone who had learned long ago that ammunition was finite and precision was infinite. The guardsmen behind her stopped flinching at the biotic field somewhere around hour 3 and started using them tactically. Pushing into cover, she cleared. Flanking through gaps, she opened. By hour 11, the Generatorum was back online. Cestus said nothing when they returned. She simply looked at Shepard for a long moment, then turned to her Vox operator and began issuing orders for the counterattack. It was the closest thing to a compliment Shepard had received since arriving. The Eldar came on the 4th day. She was running a patrol along the hive's outer transit corridor when the air pressure changed in the specific way that meant something had moved very fast through a space that should have been empty. She had her Matic up before the figure fully materialized, tall, angular, wrapped in a body glove patterned like migraine geometry, a long rifle across their back, and a curved blade at their hip. The Eldar Ranger held up both hands with the universal gesture Shepard herself had used 4 days ago. She almost laughed. His low Gothic was accented but functional. His name translated roughly as Cythereal. He represented, he said, a craft world she'd never heard of, and he had been watching her for 3 days with the calm patience of a species that measured time in millennia. "You are not Imperial," he said, not an accusation, an observation delivered with something that might have been relief. "No," Shepard said. "Then perhaps you can hear what Imperials cannot." He glanced toward the distant sounds of battle. "There's something moving beneath this conflict, something neither your soldiers nor mine have identified, something old." He paused. "We have seen it before. We did not survive the last encounter through strength alone." Shepard lowered the Matic. "Tell me everything," she said. Behind her, the Vox crackled. Valdris's frequency. She ignored it for exactly 30 seconds, memorizing Cythereal's first words before answering. Some intelligence was worth the disciplinary conversation. Valdris was predictably furious. He expressed it quietly, which was worse than shouting, a precise, scalpel-thin dissection of everything Shepard had done wrong by speaking with the Eldar unescorted, unmonitored, and without immediate lethal follow-through. Imperial doctrine on Xenos contact was not ambiguous. It was not open to interpretation. It was certainly not subject to revision by an unregistered extra-dimensional soldier with impossible biotic powers and an apparently pathological inability to shoot first. Shepard let him finish. "He had actionable intelligence about a threat neither of us had identified," she said. "I took it. You committed heresy. I committed reconnaissance." The silence between them was the kind that makes decisions. Valdris turned to the window overlooking the hive's mid-levels, where the counterattack Shepard had enabled was steadily clawing back territory. He watched it for a long moment with the expression of a man performing difficult arithmetic. "What did the Xenos tell you?" he said finally. She told him. Cythereal's intelligence described something buried beneath the Generatorum, something the Chaos cultists hadn't seized the facility for power rerouting at all. They'd seized it for excavation. 3 weeks of siege as cover for an archaeological operation in the hive's deepest sublevels, hunting an artifact of obscure but apparently catastrophic potential. The Eldar had a name for it that didn't translate cleanly. The closest approximation was the unspoken cartography, a chaos relic from a previous Black Crusade, entombed deliberately by an inquisitor who died before recording its location, until someone started digging. Valdris's expression didn't change, but his breathing did. "If that assessment is accurate," he said carefully, "then this engagement is no longer a siege. It is a retrieval operation with a siege wrapped around it as distraction." He turned from the window. "And we have been responding to the distraction for 3 weeks." "Yes," Shepard said. He looked at her with something she was beginning to recognize as his version of respect. Not warm, not generous, but real. The Inquisitor's equivalent of Cestus's silence after the Generatorum. "The Tau diplomatic vessel entered the system the morning," he said, changing direction without warning. "They have requested communication with you specifically, by name." He let that land. "I find myself wondering how a Tau ethereal knows the name of a woman who arrived in this system 4 days ago through a dimensional anomaly." Shepard filed that question in the part of her mind reserved for problems she didn't have answers to yet. The Tau envoy met her in a neutral corridor 2 hours later. A water-caste diplomat named Porashi, fluid and precise, with the particular quality of someone who had learned to read humans well enough to appear warm. She offered Shepard a place of honor aboard the Tau vessel. Safety, resources, people who would listen without reaching for an execution order. The greater good, Porashi explained gently, had room for someone like Shepard, had been waiting perhaps for someone like Shepard. The offer was genuinely appealing. That was the problem. Shepard had heard seductive philosophies before, when she'd burned one to the ground from the inside. The elusive man had believed in humanity's potential with absolute conviction and had been catastrophically, lethally wrong about the methods. She looked at Porashi's patient, reasonable face and thought about the artifact beneath the Generatorum and the 3 weeks of dead guardsmen who'd been fighting the wrong battle. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I have unfinished business here." Porashi smiled like someone who had expected exactly that answer and was prepared to wait. The Space Marines arrived on the 5th day like a theological argument made flesh. Their Thunderhawk split the smoke-choked sky without warning, descending on pillars of blue flame that scattered Cestus's outer perimeter into undignified scrambling. They were Iron Hands. She learned the chapter designation from Valdris's tight expression when he saw the iconography, a clenched iron fist on ceramite black. A chapter that had elevated their distrust of biological weakness into something approaching organized religion. Flesh was weak, machinery endured, faith was the circuitry that connected the two. Their chapter master was not present. The force was led by a tech marine named Sergeant Farrick, whose left side had been replaced with augmetics so comprehensively that the biological remainder looked almost ornamental. He had been dispatched, Valdris explained quietly, because word of the potential relic had reached Iron Hand's intelligence through channels that moved faster than conventional Vox. Farrak's assessment of Shepard took approximately 4 seconds. The unregistered operative, he said. His voice emerged from a Vox grill embedded in his throat, flat and mechanical as a cogitator readout. Astra Militarum after-action reports describe biotic field manipulation, ESO-based mass effect generation. The augmetic eye whirred, scanning her Omni tool with unconcealed technical interest. Interesting technology, primitive in certain respects, sophisticated in others. Thank you, Shepard said. I think. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment. She decided immediately that she liked him. The Iron Hands operated at a frequency she understood, mission-focused, analytically precise, allergic to the kind of performative heroism that got people killed. They were brutal in ways that troubled her, and she'd address that, but their battlefield competence was beyond question. When Ferric deployed his squad of 10 Space Marines into the Hive's contested mid-levels, the tactical situation shifted with the immediate, irreversible quality of a chess piece removed from the board. She attached herself to their advance without asking permission. Ferric didn't order her away. That was, she was learning, how Iron Hands expressed provisional respect. The fighting in the sub-levels was close and savage. Chaos cultists who'd held corridors against Imperial Guard for weeks collapsed against Space Marine advance in minutes, but the deeper they pushed toward the excavation site, the stranger the resistance became. Less fanatical, more deliberate. These weren't cultists fighting from faith. They were specialists, moving with the focused precision of people protecting something specific. Shepard pushed her biotics hard in the confined space, using shock waves to clear choke points, singularities to cluster enemies into Ferric's overlapping fields of fire. The Omni tool sputtered twice near the sub-level's deeper chambers, where the warp presence Cythereal had warned about pressed against reality like a bruise from the inside, disrupting her ESO nodes with nauseating irregular pulses. She pushed through it. She'd push through worse. After the fourth corridor, Ferric spoke without turning from his advance. Your tactical integration is acceptable, he said. High praise, Shepard replied. Yes, he agreed, entirely without irony. They reached the excavation site's outer threshold and stopped. Beyond the reinforced blast door, something was radiating wrongness at a frequency that bypassed rational analysis and went directly to the part of the brain that understood, ancestrally, the difference between darkness that was empty and darkness that was occupied. Ferric looked at her. She looked at him. Together, she said. The Iron Hand processed this for exactly 1 second, then nodded once with the economy of someone who didn't waste motion on unnecessary gestures. The door came down. The chamber beneath Varanthos Prime had not been built by human hands. The excavation had broken through the Hive's industrial bedrock into something far older, a space that predated the city above it by an order of magnitude that made the mind flinch away from the calculation. The walls curved in geometries that the eye followed and then lost, angles that suggested directions which didn't correspond to anything a compass could name. Luminator beams from Ferric's squad cut through darkness that seemed to absorb light with quiet appetite, illuminating fragments of a mural that covered every surface. Figures and configurations that told a story Shepard couldn't read but could feel, the way you feel barometric pressure dropping before a storm. At the chamber's center, Suspended in a lattice of corroded iron framework was the artifact. The unspoken cartography was approximately the size of a human torso, roughly spherical, surfaced in what appeared to be obsidian until you looked directly at it and understood it was looking back. It pulsed with slow, arrhythmic light, not illuminating anything, just asserting its own existence against the surrounding darkness with the patient confidence of something that had been waiting a very long time and was not surprised to have company at last. Around it, 8 chaos specialists in ritual configuration were midway through something that had clearly been weeks in preparation. They didn't stop when the door came down. They didn't even look up. That was the most frightening thing Shepard had seen since arriving. Ferak's squad opened fire immediately. Bolter rounds detonated against a shimmering field that had snapped into existence around the ritual circle. Explosive shells blooming against the barrier like orange flowers and accomplishing nothing. Shepard hit it with a full biotic shockwave, her strongest ezo nodes burning with the effort, and felt the energy disperse into the field without resistance, absorbed and redirected with the indifference of something operating on entirely different physical principles. The artifact pulsed once, brighter. The cultists chanted faster. "We cannot breach the field by force," Ferak said. "Not panic, pure assessment." "No," Shepard agreed. Her Omni tool was throwing readings she'd never seen. Energy signatures that overlapped warp resonance with something else. Something almost mathematical. A frequency she almost recognized from relay technology. Mass effect adjacent, not identical. Close enough, close enough. "I need 30 seconds of cover fire," she told Ferak. "Keep them focused on the perimeter." "What are you going to do?" "Something that might not work." "Probability assessment." She thought about the Citadel, the Omega-4 relay. Anderson's voice in the dark. Every moment she'd committed to a solution that had no business succeeding and succeeded anyway through a combination of preparation, stubbornness, and the universe's apparent reluctance to let her die before she'd finished causing problems. 60%, she said. Ferak considered this for exactly 1 second. Iron Hands have executed successful operations on lower probability. He raised his bolter. 30 seconds, beginning now. The squad opened fire. The chamber filled with detonation and light, and the mechanical fury of 10 Space Marines who had replaced doubt with iron will. Shepard dropped low, circling the barrier's edge, Omni tool reconfiguring on instinct, not trying to break the field, but to speak to it, to find the frequency underneath the chaos resonance where the artifact's own energy signature lived. She found it at 22 seconds. At 29, she pushed a precisely calibrated biotic pulse, not force, but frequency, tuned to the artifact's own rhythm, directly into the field's foundation. The barrier shattered like glass that had been vibrating at its own resonant frequency. The cultists finally looked up. What followed was not a battle, it was a reckoning. The 8 cultists moved with the terrible fluid grace of people who had surrendered their nervous systems to something with better reflexes than human biology. Ritual daggers that trailed wrong-colored light. Mutations that had reshaped their bodies into configurations optimized for violence in ways that evolution would never have selected naturally. They were fast and they were precise, and they had been chosen specifically for this operation from a war band that did not select carelessly. Ferrick's squad killed 6 in 11 seconds. Shepard took the remaining 2. She didn't use the Matic. The thermal clips were exhausted from the sub-level advance, and she hadn't found compatible ammunition in any Imperial armory. The technology gap, a persistent, grinding reminder that she was operating in someone else's universe with someone else's rules. She fought with biotics and the close quarters instincts of someone who had been in enough desperate situations to stop being afraid of them and start being efficient instead. The last cultist died with his hands around her throat and her biotic field collapsing his ribcage from the inside. Not clean, not heroic, just necessary, the way most survival was. She stood over him, breathing hard, and looked at the artifact. It was still pulsing. Ferrick appeared at her shoulder. The ritual was interrupted but not terminated, he said, scanning with augmetic precision. The cartography remains active. Partial completion may have been sufficient for its purpose. A pause. We do not know what its purpose was. That was when Valdris arrived. He came with 6 inquisitorial stormtroopers and the particular expression of someone who had been monitoring the Vox traffic and decided the situation had exceeded its authorized parameters. He took in the chamber, the bodies, the artifact, and Shepard in approximately 2 seconds. "Step away from the relic," he said. Shepard didn't move. "We need to understand what the ritual was doing before we touch it." "Step away from the relic, Commander." "Valdris." "This is not a discussion." The stormtroopers leveled their hell guns. Ferrick's squad shifted almost imperceptibly, not raising weapons, but redistributing weight in the way that combat veterans do when they're calculating vectors. The chamber's temperature seemed to drop several degrees in the space of a single breath. Shepard looked at the Inquisitor. 31 years of hard decisions, he'd said. She believed it. She also believed that he was about to make one right now, based on doctrine rather than information, which was how good people caused catastrophic outcomes. She made a choice. "The Tau envoy knows something about this artifact," she said quietly. "Porashi mentioned relics of unspoken cartography in our conversation. I didn't connect it then. She has intelligence you don't have, Valdris. Intelligence that could tell us whether that ritual completed enough of its function to matter." The Inquisitor's expression didn't change. "You are asking me to consult a Xenos. I'm asking you to consult an intelligence source before we make an irreversible decision about an active chaos relic in a chamber full of people." She held his gaze. "You told me my hope terrified you. This is what hope looks like from the inside. It's inconvenient and it involves people you'd rather shoot, and it works anyway." The hellgun stayed raised. The artifact pulsed once more, slow and deep, like a heartbeat that belonged to nothing alive. Valdris lowered his hand. The hellguns came down. "Get me the Tau envoy," he said. To no one and everyone. To the chamber and the darkness and 31 years of certainty, he was quietly, irrevocably revising. Porashi arrived with the composure of someone who had expected to be summoned eventually and had dressed accordingly. She moved through the chamber with the measured grace of watercast diplomacy, cataloging the bodies and the artifact and the assembled representatives of three separate power structures, with the calm of someone taking inventory, rather than someone walking into a room full of people who could kill her before she finished a sentence. She paused at the artifact's edge, studied it for a long moment, and exhaled slowly through her nose. "You interrupted the third unfoldment," she said. "That is fortunate." "Explain," Valdris said. The word carried its full inquisitorial weight. Porashi didn't flinch. "The unspoken cartography is not a weapon in the conventional sense. It is a coordinate system, a map encoded in warp-resonant material that, when fully activated through the ritual sequence, broadcasts a location signal across the Imperium." She looked at the artifact. "A beacon, directing something toward whatever world it was activated on." The silence that followed had texture. "Directing what?" Ferric asked. "We don't know precisely. Our records describe only the aftermath of two previous full activations. Both worlds were lost within a standard year." Porashi paused. "The third unfoldment is the final stage of activation. You interrupted it. The beacon is partial, degraded. Whether that is sufficient to attract attention is a question our scholars have debated without resolution." Shepard looked at the artifact. It had stopped pulsing. She wasn't sure if that was reassuring. "We need to destroy it," she said. "Agreed," said Ferric. "Absolutely not," said Valdris. "A chaos relic of this significance represents invaluable intelligence. The Ordo Hereticus will contain and study." "With respect," Shepard said, and her tone carried the particular quality that her crew had learned, meant she was about to say something Valdris wasn't going to like. "Every hour that artifact exists in a partially activated state is an hour something might be navigating toward this world. We don't study a live grenade, we defuse it. You are not qualified to make that determination. Neither are you, not alone." She looked around the chamber, at Valdris, at Ferric, at Porashi, at the 6 stormtroopers and 10 space marines standing in the same room through a series of events that had no business producing this particular outcome. "But collectively, we have the Inquisition's doctrinal knowledge, the Iron Hand's technical capability, and Tau intelligence records on 2 previous activations. That's enough." Something shifted in the room. She felt it before she understood it. The specific atmospheric change of people recalibrating their positions, not through force, but through the accumulated weight of a logical argument delivered at the right moment to people tired enough of losing to consider winning differently. Ferric spoke first. "Destruction is technically achievable. The resonance frequency the commander identified to breach the barrier would, applied at sufficient amplitude, destabilize the artifact's crystalline matrix." He looked at Shepard. "Your biotic field, calibrated and sustained." "It'll hurt," she said. "Probability of success?" She thought about it honestly. The EZO nodes were already raw from the barrier breach. Sustaining a precision frequency burst at the amplitude Ferric described would push her implants past their rated tolerance. Recovery time would be significant. The alternative was leaving something in the universe that had already cost 3 weeks and thousands of lives. 70%, she said. Valdris looked at her for a long moment, then at the artifact, then at the room full of humans and Xenos standing in provisional, impossible, utterly undoctrinal cooperation. "Do it," he said quietly, like a man stepping off a ledge he'd been standing on his entire career. Shepard planted her feet and reached into the eezo nodes burning along her spine and pushed. The artifact came apart in frequencies rather than fragments. No explosion, no dramatic detonation that the surrounding chamber could contain or fail to contain. Instead, the unspoken cartography simply unraveled, its obsidian surface developing fractures that ran along lines of internal resonance. The pulsing light bleeding out through the cracks and dispersing into the chamber's darkness like breath in cold air. And then the whole structure collapsed inward with a sound like a sustained chord resolving into silence. The beacon, partial and degraded as it was, went quiet in the Imperium. Cythereal confirmed it from the hive's outer transit corridor through a Vox channel that Valdris had authorized with the expression of a man updating his entire operational philosophy in real time. Shepard hit the ground on one knee. The eezo nodes along her spine were sending signals her nervous system didn't have adequate vocabulary to process. Not pain exactly, more like the absence of something that had always been present, a sudden awareness of the machinery that kept her functional through its abrupt and emphatic protest. Her vision grayed at the edges. She was aware of Ferrick's iron hand on her shoulder, steadying without comment, the Iron Hand's version of concern expressed through structural support rather than sentiment. She stayed down for 11 seconds. Then she stood. Valdris was already issuing orders, containment protocols for the chamber, Vox communications to orbital assets, the machinery of the Inquisition grinding back into its established rhythms. But something had changed in the way he issued those orders. A degree of latitude in his phrasing, a pause before the reflexive responses where calculation now lived. 31 years of certainty hadn't been dismantled. It had been complicated, which was a different thing, and in some ways more durable. The days that followed moved at the speed of institutional consequence. Word traveled faster than it should have, through channels Shepard didn't fully understand. How a battle in a hive's sublevels had ended with an inquisitor, a tech marine, and a Tau diplomat standing in consensus over a destroyed chaos relic. The after-action reports filed by Cestus were precise and unembellished, which made them more dangerous to established doctrine than any exaggerated account would have been. Radical Inquisitor factions who had argued for pragmatic Xenos cooperation for decades found the reports circulating through their networks with the velocity of evidence long awaited. Cythereal departed without formal farewell, which Shepard had come to understand was an Eldar expression of respect. You didn't say goodbye to someone you expected to encounter again. Porashi left a communication frequency and a standing invitation, patient as her entire civilization. Ferrick submitted a technical report on biotic field mechanics to the Iron Hand's librarium that would confuse and fascinate their scholars for a generation. Valdris authorized Shepard's continued operational presence in Imperial space under a classification designation he invented specifically for her. A category of 1, impossible to process through existing bureaucratic channels, which was precisely the point. She stood on the hive's upper transit platform the morning after and looked at a sky still streaked with the residue of a siege that was finally, genuinely over. Somewhere beyond that sky, a mass relay had burned and a war against mechanical gods was still being fought without her. She couldn't go back, not yet, perhaps not ever. But there was work here, the kind of work she understood, not clean, not guaranteed, built from compromise and stubbornness and the irrational conviction that cooperation was worth the cost of the argument it required. She pulled up her Omni tool. It flickered once, then stabilized. New mission. Same principle. She started walking. Varanthos Prime survived. The Imperium filed its reports and argued about their implications for years afterward. In hushed strategiums and radical inquisitorial conclaves, a question circulated that doctrine had no mechanism to answer. What if the Imperium's greatest enemy wasn't the Xenos at its borders or the chaos in its foundations, but the certainty that it couldn't survive any other way than alone? Shepard didn't unite the Imperium, not completely, not quickly, but she cracked the architecture of its isolation in one hive, in one chamber, with 70% odds and burning implants, and the stubborn belief that the math of survival always favors cooperation over purity. The beacon was silent. For now. Somewhere in the immaterium, something that had briefly oriented toward Varanthos Prime turned its attention elsewhere. Patient as extinction, certain that eventually someone would finish what the cultists started. Shepard kept walking. The Emperor protects. More stories await.